All right, so we are recording this this meeting. For those that would need the recorded meeting, you can ask it from James. He will supply with you the recorded meeting to your various groups. All right, so with Economics 10B, basically we'll be dealing with the subject of economics, as you all know. And in particular, we'll be dealing with the branch of macroeconomics. I'm sure you all understand that when it comes to economics, there are two broad categories of economics. We have microeconomics, then we have macroeconomics. So with macroeconomics, we'll be dealing with the macro variables of the economy. We'll be looking at the economy from the holistic spectrum. We are not just looking at an individual market level, but we are looking at it from the total market level. And if you still recall, some of you that did economics, economics 1A, I don't know whether you call it 10A or what, which is referred to as microeconomics, you were dealing with the micro variables within an economy. And when you are dealing with economics 10B, we're now dealing with the macro economic variables within an economy. So for the purpose of your module is comprised of various sections that we're going to be covering them in. Let me see if I can also share that as well on your screens.
And I want to get some for the save the recording so for guys they make it well come around. First one they save that on my phone yakane. Yeah. What do you mean classic? Hey. YouTube. Okay. YouTube.
Right. Okay, so if you look at the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the contents of the module that we are required to be covering for the purposes of this module. Okay, I'm opening the wrong document. This is the document that I want. Okay. All right, so you can see the contents of the requirements of the module. The first unit deals with the measuring of the performance of an economy, whereby we'll be dealing with how we can assess whether an economy is doing well or whether an economy is underperforming. And we'll be using various metrics that are used in assessing the economy. I think that's the topic that we're going to be dealing with today in particular, that is measuring the performance of an economy and looking at the various variables that are used in assessing the performance of an economy. Then the second unit is the monetary sector, whereby we'll be looking at the monetary side or the monetarist side of the economy. What happens in terms of the functions of money, what happens in it, how it is printed, who prints the money, and we'll be looking at who is responsible for issuing a currency within an economy. And we'll be also looking at the behavior of money within an economy. That's where we'll be looking at the demand for money, the various supplies of money, as well as the determinants of the interest rates in that regard. Then the third unit deals with the public sector, whereby we are required to just have an understanding of how the public sector operates. We'll be looking at various government operations. And in particular, we'll be talking about what is referred to as a fiscal policy. And when you're looking at the monetary side, you're looking at the monetary policy. Then the fourth unit, we'll be having a look at the foreign sector, whereby we are trying to understand what happens with an economy when it trades internationally with other economies, what determines exchange rates, as well as the various effects of trading with other countries. This unit deals with what is the Keynesian economy. Try to mute them there. Okay. Keynesian model of the economy. So the Keynesian model of the economy basically will be dealing with the various propagations that were propounded by a certain man called John Maynard Keynes, who propounded theories in relation to how the economy functions and the conclusions that we draw from that in relation to the modern day economies. Then we'll be also trying to be looking at the unit 6, which looks at the Keynesian models with various sectors, that is the government sector and the foreign sector. Then the 7th unit looks at the macroeconomic theory and policy. It's just an extension of the other chapters that would have looked at in relation to the Keynesian model, the monetary policy, the monetary sector, as well as the introduction of the measurements of the performance of the economy in relation to other sectors. Then lastly, we'll be looking at unemployment. And we all understand that unemployment is a very important phenomenon when it comes to measuring the performance of an economy. We'll be looking at it as well in its broader spectrum. Then the other subtopics within it would be unemployment and inflation, unemployment and then the other one is economic growth and business cycles, whereby we're now having an extension again of the measuring of the performance of the economy in relation to the business cycles within a market. So you can see that this is quite a lengthy module. It has a lot of things that needs to be covered within the period of time that we have. And I believe that with the time period that we are starting, we are going to be able to cover everything that is required in relation to the module. All right, so the other thing, we're also going to be covering the assignment. We're also going to be having a look at the assignment that you're given in relation to this particular semester. We're going to be going through the assignment questions and attempting to answer all of the questions that are within your assignments. So that is going to be coming within the same package as these tutorials that we'll be conducting throughout the time period that you're going to be together. All right, so today, let's try to get into what we want to look at and see where we can get. All right, so let me close that one and reshare again. Okay. All right, so as I highlighted when we're starting that today we're going to be looking at the first topic, which is in relation to the measuring of the performance of an economy. So we all understand that in the subject of economics, we'll be looking at the economy at a broader spectrum. So looking at the economy at a broader spectrum, we need to understand, or we need to be at a level of understanding whether an economy is performing very well, or whether an economy is underperforming, or whether an economy is just performing, that is, it's not doing well and it's not doing very bad. It is just somewhere in between. So we need to have an understanding of what we use in the subject of economics to come to the conclusion of understanding whether we can say that an economy is overperforming or whether an economy is underperforming, and all those things brought about together. So basically there are 5 metrics that are used, which are referred to as macroeconomic objectives. So these metrics are the ones that when we want to look at the performance of the economy, we can assess them and we can see whether an economy has been performing very well or whether an economy has been underperforming. So basically we have what is referred to as economic growth. We also have what is referred to as full employment. We also have what we refer to as price stability. We have balance of payment stability, as well as equitable distribution of income and wealth. So all of these 5 metrics are the measures that help us understand whether an economy is underperforming, or whether an economy is overperforming, or it is just performing on an average level. All right. So we want to look at objectives one by one so that we can understand what constitutes of what we refer to as economic growth, what constitutes to full employment, what constitutes price stability, balance of payments, as well as equitable distribution of income and wealth. All right, so economic growth is referred to as, can you please mute your microphones? Those with unmuted microphones, can you please mute your microphones? It is disturbing. It's disturbing others and disturbing me as well. All right, thank you very much. All right, so economic growth refers to the increase in real GDP. Try to mute everyone. I think someone realizing. Those who can muted Seneca, Rooks, can you please mute yourself? Okay, thank you very much. All right, so economic growth refers to the increase in real GDP over and above the previous year's GDP. So when we are looking at economic growth, we use a metric that is referred to as GDP, which basically stands for gross domestic product. So with gross domestic product, it simply refers to the total value of all the final goods and services that are produced within a business, within the boundaries of a country in a particular period of time. And usually it is referred to as a period of 12 months or 1 year. And when you're looking at most GDP statistics, they're usually given in on an annual basis, and some maybe on a quarterly basis, depending with the kind of scenario that we're dealing with. But in general, GDP simply refers to the total value of all the final goods and services produced within the boundaries of a country. So when you're looking at the total value of goods and services that are produced within the boundaries of a country, we need to have a measure of measuring the total value that we are having within the boundaries of a country. And basically there are three methods that are used in measuring the value of GDP. We have what is referred to as the production method, sometimes referred to as the value added method. We also have what is referred to as the expenditure method, which basically sums up all the expenditure by households on goods and services. Then we have what is referred to as the income method, which basically sums up all the incomes that has been received by factors of production during the production process of those goods and services that were produced within an economy. So this GDP is the one that we then use to measure the metric that we're referring to as economic growth. So for us to have the measurement of economic growth, we use a certain formula, which is referred to as GDP, the current year's GDP, current year's GDP. Then we say minus previous, okay, I've said equals there, minus previous year's GDP. Then we divide that by the previous year's GDP. Then we multiply by 100. Then the percentage that we get there is the one that is referred to as economic growth. All right, so we're going to be looking at an example in a short while on how to calculate GDP. I think we're going to take that one from your assignment. So basically, we're going to be extracting that from the assignment. All right, so for now, let's try to finish the GDP thought. All right, so we said that this GDP is measured as the total value of all goods and services that have been produced within an economy. And there are three methods that are used in measuring or in calculating GDP. That is the production method or the value added method. So with the value added method, GDP is simply calculated as the added value at each stage of productivity or at each stage of production within an economy. So suppose that a product is being produced within an economy. I'll just give a hypothetical example. Suppose that we're having a product that is being produced within an economy. Suppose we say that maybe it's bread. this bread initially is produced from wheat, and we just assume that a farmer maybe used a certain amount of wheat. Okay, somebody's apologizing for bad signal on their side. All right. Those with unmuted microphones, can you please mute yourself? Someone is saying that ECO15B, am I relevant to your class? 15B, is it similar to 10B? I'm not particularly sure about the difference between 10B and 15B. Maybe you can talk to James about that, and he can clarify more on that one. If it is macroeconomics, and the macroeconomics subject is dealing with the same topics that we're having right now, it means maybe it might be of value to you. But if it is not, you need to subscribe to the 15B class. All right, so I'm answering someone who was asking for that. All right, so somebody is saying they can't hear anything. All right, I'll ask again, am I audible? Maybe I'm not audible. Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear loud and clear.
All right, so some are hearing me, some are not hearing me. I don't know, maybe it's network on their side. Okay. All right, so I had a disturbance in between. Apologies for that. So we're talking about the production method, and we're referring to the value added at each stage of production. For us to calculate GDP using the production method, suppose that maybe there is the production of bread. It doesn't start from bread as it being just bread, but during its production phase, there is value that is being added at each stage of production, from the manufacturing, from the production of wheat itself, and from the conversion of wheat to flour, from the conversion of flour to what the bakeries will end up using. The value that is being added at each stage of that production process is what we are referring to the value addition between the productivity stages. And that is what we're going to be using to calculate the production method. For now, let's just keep that in mind. We're going to be looking at that one later in greater detail. Then the expenditure method. The expenditure method simply adds the expenditures by the households on the goods and services that have been produced by the production side of the economy. And the value that would have been extracted from the expenditures of households would be the GDP from the expenditure method. And from the income method, basically we'll be looking at it from the factor of production perspective. So the income method simply sums up the incomes that is being received by the factors of production during the production stage. So we all understand what I'm sure we all understand what factors of production are. We have basically 4 factors of production. We have capital, which is sometimes is entrepreneurship, depending with where you did your elementary economics from, and with entrepreneurship,
Land.
we have labor, then we have natural resources.
Products. Oh, labor.
Then we have natural resources. All right. So basically, those are the 4 factors of production. Those are the 4 factors of production. Can you please mute your microphones a little bit? Can you please mute your microphones? Thank you. All right.
Down in March 2020, but the pitchman has left them disappointed. We're not happy about this. We wanted to consume. That's why you don't want the turkey. And for some reason, yeah.
Moja key iPhone Sunny Boy. Can you please mute yourself?
We're not sure. We're not happy about that. Local residents say it's
iPhone and Sunny Boy.
Okay, sorry.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, so basically those are the main factors of production that we have that will be receiving incomes at each stage of production. And for each factor of production, it receives a particular type of remuneration or a particular type of income. So if you look at capital, capital usually is remunerated in form of interest. And if you look at labor, labor is remunerated in form of salaries and wages. So salaries and wages. Then if you look at, so we're saying capital, labor, entrepreneurship. An entrepreneur usually receives these benefits in form of profits. Profits that he receives sometimes, depending with his investments, it might be dividends. In some cases. Then the natural resources, which basically sometimes refers to land, is usually remunerated in form of rent. So all of these remunerations, interest, salaries and wages, profits plus dividends and rent, are the incomes that would be representing the value of GDP from the income method. Okay. All right. So from the income method, if you are given a sum of interest, a sum of salaries and wages, profits and dividends and rent, that would give you the value of GDP for that particular period. And from the expenditure method, if you are to sum up the expenditures that would have been done by households and firms within a particular period of time, it would give you the value of GDP. Let me try to explain a little bit, or to expand a little bit on the expenditure method. So on the expenditure method, we have basically consumers of goods and services that are on the goods market. Usually we refer to that as goods and services market, that are on the goods and services market. And we have various participants that will be present in that particular type of a market. I'm going to be explaining this one again using the circular flow of income. The circular flow of income. Let me see if I can get the circular flow of income image to explain it further. All right, so we are saying that, all right, let me see if I can bring it to your screens. Just give me a second. Okay. All right, so let me see. There we go. Okay, so if you look at the image on your screen, it's not particularly clear. Let me see if I can make it a little bit clear. So basically, that's a hypothetical example of what we refer to as the circular flow of income and spending within an economy. So within an economy, there are various participants that operate within an economy. And these participants are the reasons why we have something that we refer to as an economy. So the main participants of an economy, the households, the government, the firms, and something that we refer to as the financial markets. But the main ones are the households, the government, and the firms. This one is simply a facilitator within those markets. So you'd realize that the households are the ones that are referred to as the owners of the factors of productions. And we stated that the factors of productions, we have your land, your natural resources, your entrepreneurship, your capital. So as the owners of the factors of production, they are the ones that firms approach the households in relation to factors of production. If they want labor, they come to the households, and when the households offer their labor to the firms, they are remunerated in form of of wages. And when the households supply their capital or their natural resources to the firms, they are remunerated in form of rent and dividends and all the other things that we mentioned earlier on. So you'd realize that the interaction between these participants is what forms an economy. So when you're saying we have an economy, we are simply having an interaction between the households, the firms, and the government within an economic system. And this is what determines what we are referring to as the gross domestic product. Then there comes what we refer to as the financial market. The financial market, we're going to be looking at it on its own when we'll be looking at the functions of the financial market and how it contributes to the economy and how it increases the facilitation of these resources within the economy. Then the other participant that we have is the government. The government is usually a regulatory body within an economy. It ensures that there is parity between the households and the firms, and that firms maybe do not end up exploiting the households in one way or the other, and ensures that the government ensures that there's provision of public goods. And we'll be looking at this one in greater detail in the chapter of the public sector. That's whereby we'll be looking at the government sector. Then we have we have the households, the government, and the firms, and this forms what we are referring to as the economy. So when it comes to the expenditure method of calculating gross domestic product, we are looking at the expenditures that are spent by the households, by the firms, as well as the government. And in an advanced circular flow of income, we'll be having what we refer to as the foreign sector. The foreign sector, whereby we are having imports and exports, which forms part of the foreign sector, and the net spending in terms of imports or exports would also form part of the expenditure method. All right, so going back to what I was talking about, I needed that to just highlight what I'm talking about. So on the expenditure method, GDP is calculated as expenditure by the household, which is given in abbreviation C, plus the investment expenditure by firms, which is given in abbreviation I, plus the government spending, that is the spending by the government on various public works and all these other things that the government intervenes within the economy to produce. Then we have the net factor from abroad, or the net foreign expenditure, which is given by X minus M, X representing the exports, then M representing the imports. So you see that M is a negative there, and indicating that it's an outflow of expenditure from the country going to other countries. And X is a positive, indicating that whenever we are exporting, we are actually receiving expenditure into the nation. And this forms part of what we are referring to as the expenditure method. So if you are just looking at this equation here, you can have an understanding of the whole economy, or what we'll be talking about in terms of the subject of macroeconomics. This is the macroeconomics in an equation format. So that this is everything that we're going to be talking about. If you realize the consumption function that we're going to be talking about in terms of the consumption by households, it emanates from the consumption function here. That is the consumption by households and firms, and that facilitates the provision of money, and that is where money is going to be coming from again. The public sector, we talked about it. The investments by firms will be referring to the monetary side as well as the fiscal side of the economy. Then this one would be in reference to the foreign sector, which is the balance of payments that we're going to be talking about in a short while. So basically, this is what defines the whole subject of economics. So, all right, so we're talking about GDP as an important factor in measuring the performance of an economy. So the other method that is used in measuring the performance of an economy is the one that is referred to as full employment. So with full employment, basically the main metric that is used in measuring full employment is what is referred to as unemployment. Unemployment. All right, so I'm sure that all of us have heard about the word unemployment in many spheres, maybe in the news or maybe in your reading that maybe the unemployment rate is so high, the unemployment rate this, the unemployment what, and we want to unveil and to demystify what unemployment is. So basically unemployment simply refers to the percentage of the labor force that is unemployed. So basically I've talked about two things here, that is the labor force and the unemployed. The labor force and the unemployed. So in any economy, we have something that we refer to as the labor force. So the labor force represents those that are of a working age, first of all, and which are actively seeking for employment. So we're looking at the people that are actively employed and those that are actively seeking for employment. So basically, the labor force would be demystified, or rather be further explained as the sum of the unemployed plus the employed. So if people that are already working, they are part of the labor force. With people that are not working, they are not part of the, they are part of the labor force as well, but they are simply not employed yet, but they are part of the labor force. So when you're looking at the labor force that we have in South Africa, we'll be looking at the sum of the employed individuals and the unemployed individuals. So measuring the unemployed individuals is what would determine the unemployment rate. So the unemployed individuals usually referred to as those that are actively, let me type that, actively seeking for employment but cannot find it for any reason that might be said. Those that are actively seeking for employment and cannot find it are referred to as the unemployed. So for us to calculate the unemployment rate, it is given as the unemployed. Let me just copy what I've already typed in. It is given as the unemployed divided by the labor force. Then if you multiply that by 100, you will get the percentage of unemployment. So basically that is how we can calculate unemployment. So there are various methods that are used, other methods that are used in calculating unemployment, some which are referred to as the strict definitions. This one is the one that is referred to as the strict definition of defining unemployment, whereby we're just looking at those that are actively seeking for employment and cannot find the employment as a percentage of the labor force. That is what we refer to as the unemployment rate. But there's the other method of calculating unemployment, which is referred to as the expanded definition of calculating unemployment. So the expanded definition of calculating unemployment, just for interest's sake, let me just talk about it, but we are not really interested in it. All right, so for the expanded definition of calculating unemployment, it basically looks at those that are of a working age or of a working population. That is the age group between 15 and the retirement age, maybe 64 years. So we'll be looking at the unemployed, the labor force would be, those that are of a working age. That means that the population between 15 to 64. So everyone that falls within this category of 15 to 64 would be regarded as the labor force. And it basically includes anyone that is unemployed. So the unemployed in this particular formula would be anyone that is unemployed within that same age range. So anyone that is unemployed within the age range of 15 to 64 would be regarded as unemployed. So basically, that would be the so I'm trying to say unemployed between the age range of 15 to 64. So this is calculated as a percentage of the total population. So when you're now calculating the total population would include everyone. Total population. The total population would include everyone, not just within the age range of 15 to 64, but everyone that is within the nation. And maybe the population centers might say that maybe in South Africa there are 60 million people, just as a rough estimate. So everyone that is unemployed between the age range of 15 to 64 divided by the total population, which might be maybe at an estimate of 60 million people, times 100 would give us the unemployment rate using the expanded definition. So basically, these are the two methods that are mainly used in calculating unemployment rate. But for the purposes of this module, I think we will mainly focus on this one, which is the strict definition. But if a question requires you to use the expanded definition, you can do so. All right. So basically, that is how we calculate unemployment. So there are various types of unemployment. So we're going to be looking at those ones as we'll be looking at the subject of unemployment on its own and its various effects within the economy that we're not really interested at right now. So basically, if you want to see whether there is maybe the economy is performing well in terms of unemployment or whether it is not performing well in terms of unemployment, basically a highly performing economy should not necessarily have any unemployment. Everyone should be employed, but they are just there are leeways that are given, certain percentages that are said to be acceptable, maybe between 0 to 5% as acceptable acceptable indices of unemployment, whereby maybe the highest the economies that are regarded to be maybe efficient in terms of employment would be having that same index. So basically, when you're looking at it, the least percentage that we can get in terms of unemployment, the better that an economy is performing. All right. So the other measure of the performance of an economy is price stability. Price stability. So just let me just bring that one to the other. Price stability. All right, so with price stability, we are looking at the stability of prices within the economy. So basically, price stability is usually a function of the monetary policy, which we refer to as the monetary policy. So whenever you see the monetary policy, or whenever you hear the word of monetary policy, the main objective of the monetary policy is to ensure that there is price stability within an economy. That is their main objective, and usually the Reserve Bank governor is responsible for producing a monetary policy of a nation. So with the monetary policy, we are now looking at the monetary side of the economy, and we want to see if the economy is performing well with regards to the monetary side within its functions. So price stability is mainly measured using the metric of inflation. So when you hear the word inflation, it basically highlights whether there's price stability or whether there's no price stability. So inflation is defined as the general increase in the price levels. Price levels, my spelling there. The general increase in the price levels is indicated by the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. We're going to be talking about the Consumer Price Index in a short. All right, so basically inflation would be the general increase in the price levels within an economy as indicated by the CPI. The CPI is a measure that measures the cost of living within an economy. Basically takes the basket of goods that are regarded as essential within an economy, or that are regarded as the main consumption goods and services within an economy. And they are given various weights, and the weights are then used to come up with what we refer to as the CPI. We're going to be looking at that one later on, but for now we need to understand how inflation can be measured. So inflation is measured as the difference between the current year's, or the current CPI, minus the previous CPI divided by the previous consumer price index. And you can multiply that 100 by 100 to get a percentage. So the current year's CPI minus the previous year's CPI divided by the previous year's CPI times 100 would give you the level of inflation, or the percentage of inflation that is prevailing within within a particular nation or a particular country. Sometimes the previous year's CPI is referred to as the best CPI. In some instances, they give you a best CPI, which is basically a year maybe where prices were deemed to be stable. Maybe it might not really be the previous year, as in the previously successive year, but it might be another year which is different from the previous year, which is referred to as the best year. And that base year can be used to calculate the overall inflation, that is the increases in the general price levels over a long period of time. All right, so it depends with particular circumstances that you're given, but in the general circumstance, this is how you can calculate your inflation. We're going to be calculating inflation in a short while, looking at a question that was presented in your assignment. So basically, this is how you can look at price stability. So inflation at times is not required within an economy, but it can be required to a certain extent. And usually they say that the normal level of inflation should be between 0 to 5% within an economy. So any inflation rate that is beyond that would be regarded as bad inflation. Like currently in the United States, they are having an inflation rate which is up to I think over 6%, and they are so much worried. If you look at the their Federal Reserve governors, they are so much worried about the advent of inflation within their economy, because they know that it's going to be affecting a lot of variables at the same time. So inflation is not something that is to be taken off lightly. It can cripple economies, it can destroy economies, it can actually cause many things to be distorted within an economy. So other countries like Zimbabwe, Argentina, Germany have experienced inflation in various years. And I think in Zimbabwe in 2008, there was inflation which amounted to I think 2000%, somewhere there, even going into millions, as their currency was continuously being eroded by inflation. So inflation is something that affects many economic variables at the same time and needs to be closely looked at. So as economists, we are very much keeping a close eye on inflation. All right, so moving on to balance of payments stability, which is another metric, which is another measure that is used to measure the performance of an economy. So with the balance of payments stability, when I was talking about the expenditure method, I talked about X minus M, where I said X represents exports, X represents exports, and M represents imports. X represents exports and M represents imports. So the difference between imports and exports would give us what we refer to as the stability between the balance of payments. So within the economy, any economy that operates does not operate in a vacuum. it has to trade with other nations, and thus it introduces us to international trade, which we're going to be looking at later on. So any normal economy has to trade with other economies for it to be performing very well, because it produces goods and services that are needed in other countries, and it also needs goods and services that comes from other countries. Like, for instance, we import other things from China. We import mobile phones from the US, from China, from other countries, from Korea, and all these other countries. And South Africa exports some of its wine that it produces in Cape Town to other countries. So the balance between imports and exports is very, very important, because it determines whether an economy is being hemorrhaged by its international trade or whether it is benefiting from its international trade spectrum. So what are we saying when you're saying that it's being hemorrhaged by the international trade spectrum? We're saying that when an economy is importing more than it is exporting, it means that there is a balance of payments instability. Therefore, an economy is being hemorrhaged because funds and resources are moving from the country going to other countries. So whenever we're having funds and resources moving from South Africa to other countries, it means that you're actually creating employment for other countries. You're actually supporting the economies of other countries. You're actually increasing their tax base. You're actually increasing their investments actually in other countries. And whenever an economy is exporting more than it is importing, it means that that economy is at a healthy state, and that indicates a favorable position for an economy, because it highlights that an economy is performing in the favorable manner. But the balance is what we need. That is, we do not want the country to be highly above. That is, of course, when you're exporting more, it is beneficial than when you are importing more. But the balance between the imports and the exports is what is very, very important, because it affects other variables like your exchange rates at the same time, and investments at the same time. So it is very, very important for us to take a look. So for us to understand the balance of payments is measured, the BOP is measured as the BOP, that is the balance of payments. BOP is measured as the sum of the current account. I'm going to define what the current account is. Current account plus the sum of the financial account, sometimes referred to as the capital account. All right, so I'm just going to briefly talk about what constitutes the current account and what constitutes the financial account. So the current account is basically a measure between the imported goods and services and exported goods and services. So basically the current account is given as the sum of exports minus the sum of imports. So the sum of exports minus the sum of imports. So I've just said exports. So these exports include your goods and services. So the sum of your goods and the sum of your services in terms of exports minus the sum of goods and services in terms of your imports would give you what we refer to as the current account. So this current account would overall contribute to the balance of payments, or rather it is the main contributor to the balance of payments, because when you are exporting more of your goods and services than you are importing more of your goods and services, obviously that is going to result in the same net effect on the financial account. So the financial account basically measures the flow of what we refer to as foreign direct investments or hot money into the country. So it basically measures the flow of funds into the country, into and out of the country, in order for us to determine whether we are having a balance in terms of the balance of payment stability. So basically the sum of the current account and the financial account would give us the balance of payments, and the balance of payments has to be a positive figure. That means that whenever it's positive, it means that the economy is exporting more than it is importing. And whenever it is negative, it means that the economy is importing more than it is exporting, and hence it is at an unfavorable position. All right, so basically this is how we can measure the performance of an economy using the balance of payments. And last but not least is the equitable distribution of income and wealth. Equitable distribution of income and wealth. So the equitable distribution of income and wealth, basically we are now looking at the welfare within the economies that have been assessed after looking at their economic growth, after looking at their price stability, after looking at their unemployment and the balance of payments. So when you're looking at the equitable distribution of income and wealth, you are now looking at the extent to which each and every individual within the economy is benefiting from the state of the economy, that is for those economies that are doing well. So for example, we take the current example that we have in South Africa here. South Africa is a GDP that is close to 500 billion in United States dollars, in US dollar terms. That is close to 500 billion in US dollar terms. And if you are to look at, let me just put that figure down, 500 billion. So this is a hypothetical figure, it's just an estimate. I'm not saying it's the correct one. 500 billion, so that we are saying that this is in US dollar terms. So if you look at this particular type of economy, in Africa, it is said to be the second largest economy, just after Nigeria. So that means that this is a heavyweight if you're looking at the economies in Africa. I think just after Nigeria, I'm not particularly sure with Egypt, whether it's number 2, whether it's number 3, or somewhere in between there. I haven't looked at the statistics for a long time now. So $500 billion in US dollar terms for an economy of about 60 million people. And if you are to look at this, if you are to divide this this GDP or these vast amounts of wealth within the South African economy, within that same period of time, if you're going to be dividing, maybe let's say 500 billion divided by 60 million, I think you get a figure of, let me see if you're going to be doing your math there. I think you get a figure somewhere between 10 and 11, and this is in millions of dollars, 10 and 11. So let's just say 10 million. So we're saying that each and every individual in South Africa should be having, if I did my math correctly, you can do your math on your side. I'm just using my head here. So we're saying that each and every individual in South Africa should be having at least 10 million in their pockets as the amounts of goods and services that they would have consumed in a particular year. So we're saying that this is on an annual basis. But if you're to look at it in real terms, how many people have a yearly net worth or a yearly income that amounts to $10 million? We are now looking at it in real terms. You'd realize that a small percentage of people actually reach to that level of having these vast amounts of resources or enjoying these vast amounts of goods and services on an annual basis. So that is where the equitable distribution, or rather the distribution of income and wealth spectrum, comes into play, because we are now assessing where is the vast amounts of this income going to? How many individuals are benefiting from the wealth of an economy if you are to look at it from an equitable basis and comparing it with the current unequitable basis that the economy maybe is propagating. So that's where you can analyze whether an economy is benefiting from its activities or whether the citizens are benefiting, whether they're not benefiting in real terms. And if you are to look at that, you can see that actually in South Africa, just a few people actually reach a yearly income of above, maybe let's just say in rand terms, of above 500,000 rand. Few people reach that level. So that means that we are having a situation that is undesirable in South Africa. So in order for us to measure this particular equitable distribution of income and wealth, whether we're having it as equitable or whether we're having it as inequitable, we use a metric that is referred to as the Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient. So this Gini coefficient basically measures the extent to which an economy's wealth is distributed, and it ranges between 0 to 1. With 0 meaning that we have perfect equality, and with 1 indicating that we have perfect inequality. So that means that if you're having 1, it means only one person controls the total amount of wealth, or rather maybe only 10%, or rather let's put it in percentage terms. We're saying that maybe all of the wealth of a nation is being enjoyed maybe by a single individual. And when we're having 0, it means that everyone is enjoying equally an equal portion of the wealth within a nation. So in South Africa, I think the Gini coefficient has been propagated to be around 0.62, 0.61, 0.62, somewhere there, if I'm not mistaken, which indicates that we are having a very unequal distribution of income and wealth. So we're having a very unequal distribution of income and wealth. So that means that many people that are working, many people that are going to work, or people that are actually not going to work, do not have any share in terms of the resources that are being produced each and every year, actually benefiting little of what is happening. So obviously this warrants for further studies to understand why we're having such a scenario within an economy that is producing, which is referred to as the second largest within the economy in terms of the African economies, and having the highest unequal distribution of income and wealth. What is causing that? We need to have a study, and who is owning the resources is also another question that economists need to delve into to understand where is the resources that these other people are not having, and how did it get to that point where we are having only just a few individuals controlling the wealth of a nation, whereby we are told that the South African rand can be controlled by, in terms of its exchange rate, can be controlled by a single individual who determines that the South African rand has to be exchanged in the foreign exchange market at such and such a rate. People with such amounts of power within a single nation. So this indicates a state of, actually this is a state of disaster, because it highlights the failure of the economic systems in distributing the wealth and various incomes within an economy. So we're going to be looking at this one in greater detail using other metrics that are used in measuring the equitable distribution of income and wealth. But for now, I think I've presented the first topic, which is measuring the performance of an economy. So we're going to be looking at some of these things in greater detail. All right, so before we close, we want to look at the questions that pertains to what we've presented that were within your assignment. So let me just take a look at the assignment. Let me stop the share and reshare again. I want now my screen to be visible. All right. So let's see the assignment. All right, so this is the assignment that you're required to, starting here. Assignment 2022, first semester, ECO10B, Economics 1B. Define the following concepts or terms: Lorentz curve, progressive. We're not looking at that ones today, on those ones today. So I'll skip question 1, then I'll rush to question 2. Question 2, which says that read the following scenario in order to answer the questions that follow. Scenario 1, suppose that you are hired as an economist to advise the South African policymakers on the performance of the economy. In order to evaluate the economic performance, the following data is provided. Then we have the data economic indicator 2021, 2022, sorry, 2020, 2021. Then we have real GDP, we have Gini coefficient, CPI, labor force, population, then the various other things there. Then we have been told that not monetary values are expressed in millions of rand. And you are required to evaluate 5 main macroeconomic objectives, namely economic growth, full employment, price stability, external stability, and equitable distribution of income and wealth. Then it states that from scenario 1, data on several economic indicators are provided. Using your knowledge on 5 macroeconomic objectives, this is the knowledge that we were sharing. Evaluate on the performance of the South African economy for the period between 2020 to 2021 by answering the succeeding questions. Show all your calculations to substantiate your answer. So this is the data that you're going to be using and the questions that you're going to be answering. So let me just see if I can snipe that. Let me see if I can snipe that one off so that we have it on the screen that you're going to be using. All right, let me rush to the questions. All right, so the questions are saying that in assessing economic growth, answer the following questions. So this is the first indicator, economic growth. All right. Let me bring that one down so that I have it on one page. All right, so they want us to answer questions regarding economic growth. We defined economic growth earlier on, and we looked at how it can be measured, the metric of the difference between 2 GDPs. And it says that calculate the measurement used in assessing economic growth. All right, so earlier on, we highlighted the formula, which is the difference between the 2 GDPs. So you can see that the current year's GDP, so let me just, all right, I think it's clear. Let me just try to zoom in a little bit. Okay, I think now it's a little bit clearer. All right. Let me zoom in the question. All right. So we said that it is the difference between the 2 GDPs. And in this regard, it's the real GDP. So in other lessons that we're going to be doing, we're going to also demystify the difference between what is referred to as real GDP and nominal GDP. So real GDP basically represents the inflation adjusted GDP, and nominal GDP represents the unadjusted GDP. So real GDP for 2021 minus real GDP for 2020. Then we divide that by the real GDP for 2020. Then we multiply that by 100 to get a percentage. All right. Then the real GDP for 2021 has been given as 4237249. So we have 4 million. So obviously these are not real figures. Okay, they're saying they are in millions of rands. So when they're in millions of rands, that means that you're supposed to be putting extra figures, but we just know that this is in millions. So basically this highlights that it's actually in billions. So minus 4,134,781, and it's in millions. All right. So then we look for that difference. Then we divide that by the previous year's GDP. The previous year's GDP, which is, so we divide that by 4, this figure here. All right, so for those with calculators, economics is a mathematical subject. Make sure that whenever you attend a session, you are having your calculator. So we multiply that by 100. So for those with calculators, what are you getting as the economic growth? For those with calculator, you can type in on the chat, or you can actually unmute yourself and say something. And don't forget to mute yourself afterwards. For those with calculators, what is the percentage that you're getting? Let me see if I can get a calculator. All right, someone is saying 2.478%. Are we all getting 2.487%? 2.478%. It's Sonica. Sonica is saying 2.478%, and she's asking, is this correct? Let's see. Someone, Gareth is saying it's correct. Gareth is saying it's correct. All right. So that means that's the economic growth percentage that we have. So what we're interested in when you're looking at economic growth is just to understand whether there was any growth or whether there wasn't any growth within that economy. What we do not want to see as economists is a contracting economy whereby the previous year's GDP is actually lesser. So the current year's GDP is actually lesser than the previous year's GDP, which indicates a contracting GDP, which if it persists, it might lead an economy into a depression. And I'm sure you've all heard about the Great Depression, you've heard about recessions and all these other things. So now when they are great, it means that it was persisting for a long period of time. So the other question stated that based on your answer above, explain whether the economy performed. Okay, I think they want to say whether the economy performed well. So you can actually say that 2.4, we've not been given any target GDP growth. 2% growth in GDP is actually not bad. That is one of the best growths that you can find. You can find 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, etc. So depending with the targets, it's actually a good thing that we're having in any economic growth. So any positive economic growth that can be calculated from any economy is actually a good performance from any economy. So basically, we can say that the economy performed well. Then we move on to 2.2. So I'm mostly interested in calculations. So this one is obvious, the one for economic growth. Then for the one for full employment, we stated that what measure we use to calculate full employment, it's unemployment, and unemployment can be calculated using either the strict definition or the expanded definition. And we stated that we are mostly interested in the strict definition because it gives us a clearer picture of unemployment within a nation. So we stated that unemployment can be calculated as the unemployed divided by the labor force, times 100. So from your information, the number of unemployed individuals has been given in 2020. So we have 2 years here. Now we have 2020 and 2021. I think they want us to calculate for how many marks does it have? It has 2 marks. So basically they want us to, we can calculate both years so that we can compare whether there was an increase or there was no increase. So for 2020, we are saying the unemployed was 1,588,796 divided by the total population. Let me try, something is blocking my vision there. I don't know how to remove it. All right, let me see if I can look at the other screen. I can see clearly. Let me see if I can zoom in. All right, this figure here, which is 4.
5.
It's 5, yes, thank you. It's 5, 8,
But
8, 4,
sasa uyalwa. When
5, 5, 8, 8, 4, 4, 3, 3, 5, 8, 4. 5, 8, 8, 4, 4, 3, 3. Can you please mute yourself? Thank you. 100. So for 2021, those with calculators, can you help us? Then for 2020, so for 2020, sorry, then 2021. Then for 2021, we are saying 1,780,356. Someone with an unmuted microphone, please mute yourself. Would appreciate. Okay, I think it's Leah. Leah, can you please mute yourself? Thank you.
I'm muted.
1,356 divided by the total population of, the labor force of 6,139,265. Then we